Good evening, and welcome to the Institute of Politics Speaker Event Series, The Reality of Immigration and Deportation in Chicago. My name is Riley Cruz, and I am a second year in the college, originally from Utah. I'm studying Law, Letters and Society and Global Studies. As someone passionate about immigration in Chicago, and who's currently serving as an IOP intern this year for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant, Migrant, and Refugee Rights, I'm honored to introduce tonight's panel. Through discussions with the immigration clinic here at the law school, I have become more aware of how critical it is to shift and reform our outdated immigration system. Tonight, we are joined by an outstanding group of panelists to share their expertise on immigration in Chicago, and their perspectives are sure to spark meaningful conversation and deepen our understanding of the future ahead. Ronald Vitiello has served as the U.S. Customs and Border Protection frontline agent to the federal executive and acting director of ICE, where he's promoted to Homeland Security and Public Safety. Mr. Vitiello currently serves as a senior advisor to U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Department of Homeland Security, where he's dedicated to serving and securing the border and solidifying public policy and statutes. Muzaffar Chishti serves as the Migration Policy Institute Senior Fellow and the Director of MPI Office at the New York University School of Law. His work on U.S. national policy examines the intersection of labor and immigration law, and he has testified before Congress on key immigration issues. Nubia Willman is the former director of Chicago's Office of New Americans under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, where she was dedicated to strengthening economic development and increasing civic engagement. Ms. Willman continues to serve the community as the Chief Programs Officer and Latinos Progresando and advises inclusive solutions across many platforms. Moderating our discussion today are Doan, Tran, and Ammar Ghouse. Doan is a second year in the college from Quincy, Massachusetts, majoring in political science and global studies. Ammar is a second year in the college from Seattle, Washington, majoring in economics and public policy. Both are members of the Institute of Politics student-led event committees. Doan is representing the International Policy Program, and Ammar is moderating as co-chair of Chicago Style. Some quick housekeeping before we begin, please. First, please silence your cell phones. Second, when it is time for the Q&A, a microphone will be placed in the audience. Please line up and remember that first questions will go to students. Finally, please make sure to check up the upcoming IOP events, including Pakistan's Domestic and Global Challenges, a conversation with Hina Char on April 23rd at 4 p.m., and South Korea and Political Turmoil on April 24th at 5:30 p.m. Both events will be hosted at the IOP. Also, next week is Journalism Week at the IOP. Please check the website for events featuring the Know Your Enemy podcast and a panel of White House reporters reflecting on Trump's first 100 days in office. Now please join me in welcoming to the stage Ronald Vitiello, Muzaffar Chishti, Nubia Willman, Doan, Tran, and Ammar Ghouse.
I'm there?
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much to Briley for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to you all for coming out on behalf of Doan and myself, everyone at Chicago Style and the International Policy Program, and everyone here at the Institute of Politics. We want to welcome you to what we hope will be a very enlightening conversation. I want to extend a very warm thank you to all three of our panelists for being here tonight, for being very gracious and sharing your time and your expertise. And to start us off, I want to dive right into it because we have a lot to get to. So I'd like to just start by posing a question to all three of you. You know, if we can back up from sort of the fire that is the news cycle the last few weeks, and look back, you know, as Trump came into office, looking at the election, the inauguration, where are we with the issue of immigration? Because it's a very hot button issue. It gets to sort of the deep-seated heart of American politics. It sort of functions as the third rail, very highly charged. Where are we on this issue? What are some of the biggest things that are facing Chicago and the nation as a whole?
All
Mr. Vitiello, would you like to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for this opportunity. I look forward to the dialogue. Where are we? As Trump got elected and then inaugurated, we had just seen the worst illegal migration, mass migration along the southwest border than ever had been seen in the country before. As an example, the numbers don't tell every story, but the story of the numbers, about 5,100 on average, the 365 days of 2024, fiscal year 2024. So that means 5,100 people were crossing the border illegally every 24 hours. If you stretch out the year and divide by 365, the numbers divide by 365. Today, and a couple of weeks after inauguration, that number per 24 hours is about 250. So there's been a dramatic change in what the physical border looks like. And then there's been a number of things that the president did in an effort to help control and manage what the physical border looks like. And there's also been a lot of policy decisions. But on the physical border, it's a 97% reduction in illegal migration across the southwest border in just the first couple of days. And what that means is the men and women of the front line of DHS, I was in the Border Patrol for a number of years, 33 to be exact, that's 97% more capacity from that patrol group, right? The men and women that are out there, so they have less to see on the monitors and the sensors and the equipment that they use to help surveil the border. There's a 90+% increase of their activity, being able to respond to what they see at the border. And so for them, it's much safer than it's ever been. There's also added to the workforce on the southwest border of about 17,000 agents, 10,000 military members from the Department of Defense on loan, and they're focused on the physical border. Not all 10,000 of them are there, but the Army has, or the DoD has committed about 10,000 troops. And then Mexico itself has deployed their National Guard on the northern border to have a military-to-military relationship side by side with the front line. And so there's a dramatic decrease in the illegal migration. And that, again, gives us more capacity to rescue victims of the environment, to rescue people who are being trafficked, to seize illicit narcotics. And so there's been a general improvement in the physical operation at the border. And again, a number of policy decisions that also
All right. Thank you so much.
Help manage what's going on.
Thank you so much, Mr.
How dare you come to this space and pretend to be anything but what you are? A parasite on the American people. You have no fucking idea what it means to be an American.
One of us here is acting. One of us here is acting. One of us here is acting, and it is not me. It is not me.
Works 10 times harder. Our fucking people do 10 times more for this country.
Yeah, you look like you're having a rough day.
You are a league of parasites.
That's not true.
How dare you
That's
present
not true.
yourself here? And everyone will tell you how much of a devil you are. But they have no idea how lazy you are. You have no idea what it means to be an American. You have no idea.
One of us in this conversation is going to know what they're talking about, and the other one is just going to yell about it.
To give you every luxury that you enjoy.
Okay.
You live in a beat, prissy life. You get to enjoy sitting in a cushy office while our fucking communities pay the brunt of your terror. You are a monster, and we will remember you the way we remember Hitler and Goebbels today.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate you being here. Very productive.
How dare you come here and speak? How dare you?
Thank you so much for your perspective, Mr. Chishti and Ms. Willman.
Really quickly, I'd like to just apologize to the panelists. We obviously don't tolerate the profanity that was used, we have an audience questioning segment at the end for the reason so that the audience can hear from all of you. And I mean, we invited Mr. Vitiello here tonight to be able to hear from him, and so that's really the goal of this.
Great.
But go ahead, please.
So Ms. Willman or Mr. Chishti, would you like to
Will we
share?
wake up tomorrow and see our classmates have been abducted illegally? How dare you show your face at U Chicago? Am I going to wake up tomorrow and see my classmates taken like Mahmoud Khalil or Rumesa or Mohsen Mahdawi, Deqaq Bortia? It's shameful that we're having a conversation with...
We're not having a conversation. You're just over here yelling.
Enablers. I am disgusted to see this happening in U Chicago. This is how fascism It's shameful.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Ms.
So
Willman, would you like to share? Thank you.
I want to just, let's level set a little bit, because there are some things I want to discuss, because I do disagree with some of the ways that this was being portrayed. But I want us to take a step back, because I think what's important, especially when we talk about the numbers at the border, is that none of us exist in a vacuum. And the things that happen right now don't exist in a vacuum either. So I'm formerly with the city of Chicago. I worked under Mayor Lightfoot, and I want to talk a little bit about the city perspective. But often we talk about Chicago being a welcoming city, and I want to make sure that we're operating from the same set of facts and the same set of glossaries. And so we often talk about Chicago becoming a welcoming city under Mayor Harold Washington. But it's really important to understand that the essence and the principles of the city started even before him. Under Jane Addams, under Anton Cermak, Chicago was a city that really embraced immigrants, our Italian immigrants, our Irish immigrants, in a way that many other major cities did not. So through that lens, we really got to a space in 1985 when an American citizen was trying to walk into City Hall, and an INS officer, then immigration, stopped her and asked for her papers. Now, this INS officer didn't know that she was friends with Mayor Washington, and so she went to Mayor Washington and said, what are you going to do to protect people like me, an American citizen, from being harassed by this immigration official? And so our most learned mayor, Mayor Washington, issued the first executive order creating a welcoming city. Other mayors from that, in 2006, Mayor Daley codified it, and other mayors have since then strengthened it in different ways. So in 2021, under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, we created the strongest welcoming city ordinance in the country. And then in 1985, just as it was true in 2021, the whole point of creating this ordinance was to strengthen and protect the due process and the rights of all of our residents, including our citizens and those without status. It was really important. So I think when we're talking about immigration and the policies and how and why we do removal and deportation and all the other laws that exist, we really need to look at it through the due process lens, which is a principle that we all hold very dear in this country. And so I will pause, because I know my colleague to the right also has some things to say.
So thank you so much for inviting us here and for listening to us patiently. I work for the Migration Policy Institute. We actually, on Thursday, are going to issue a report on the first 100 days of the Trump administration in its immigration action. So please pay attention to it. We are a nonpartisan organization. We have analyzed and observed administrations over time. We were critical of the Biden administration as we were critical of Trump 1, and we'll analyze Trump 2. In the first 100 days of the Trump administration, they have issued more executive actions, 5 times more in the first 100 days of the Trump 1 administration. So that's reality. I think all of us should pay attention. The President Trump himself believes, whether you believe it or no, that he got elected the first time and he got re-elected on the basis of immigration narrative. He's convinced. Therefore, every agency of the government is seen as helping him in his agenda, what we call, of stopping the invasion of the border and for mass deportation. And therefore, we believe that all agencies of the government, ancient laws which we haven't invoked since World War II, databases that haven't been mined in the way they have, that we have landed up having an immigration enforcement machinery unmatched in modern history. And it's obviously producing results, and I'm not doubt. I mean, I'll say it more explicitly than Mr. Vitiello said. At the peak of the Biden administration, the monthly arrivals at border were 300,000 peak in December of 2023. Last month in March, they were down to 7,000. So it's a huge change, but it has happened at the price of something. And I think in departure from the prior administrations, they have decided to have machinery of immigration enforcement acting within the country. In the prior administration, Biden administration had probably one of the highest records of deportation. People were deported from the border or from the criminal justice system within our country. It's for the first time that we have a huge shift, that we are trying to arrest people in our communities ready for, and that is a huge departure, and that's why we are feeling the stress and the concern in the communities that partly we witnessed today.
Thank you so much for your perspectives on that. So I want to hone back in on Chicago a little bit more. So the Chicago city officials sort of refer to Chicago as a welcoming city, but under the Trump administration, the city is being referred to as sort of a sanctuary city, which implies that Chicago is sheltering those with criminal backgrounds. Could you talk a little bit about your perspectives on this and the adjustment programs for immigrants in the city, and sort of what is the city doing to support migrants who cannot find work?
What was this, like the programs? Sorry.
Adjustment programs.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Or any, yeah.
Oh, okay, I think we have it. So there really is no legal definition between sanctuary city and a welcoming city. I think some cities use it interchangeably. Most cities who focus on sanctuary have focused on specifically not engaging with law enforcement. Under Mayor Lightfoot's leadership, when we talked about welcoming city, it was really to be more holistic in ensuring that we also had resources for our community, that we helped immigrants, no matter how long they've been here, immigrants who had become naturalized citizens become more engaged with their civic government. That was really the point of us calling ourselves a welcoming city. And so there's no real legal definition. I think what we're seeing is that folks are creating a narrative that says, by you, city government, not engaging with the federal government and helping support immigration enforcement, you are writing a blank check to criminals and saying, it's a free-for-all here. And that's not really what it is. And it's easy to say that. It's easy to create a boogeyman out of immigrants. And I think we even saw that, right? Claiming that we were eating cats and dogs. It's really easy to create a boogeyman out of someone who's not born here. But the reality is that these laws are put in place to ensure that the city government and the state government is protecting its residents, which is the duty that these local municipalities have. It means that we're protecting the due process, and we're not just saying, okay, you say he's a gang member, so here he is, take him away, without any ability for that person to be able to go through the appropriate proceedings to make sure that their rights are being protected. And I know it's really hard to think, because again, there's been this good and bad narrative of immigrants sort of built. It's really hard to say, well, the bad ones, they don't deserve protection, or the bad ones shouldn't get due process. But you can't really, the whole point of a criminal justice system and a legal justice system is that it's impartial, right? You are able to give this type of due process to anyone regardless of their behavior, because that is a principle that we hold dear, that's part of the foundation of our country. And so it's really important when we're having these conversations that we parse through a lot of the emotion of this person's bad and I want them out of here, and really talk about the principles that we hold dear and we need to hold fast within this United States.
Mr. Vitiello, do you have a response to it?
I would just add on the idea and the principle and the rights that we have for due process. In a criminal proceeding in front of a jury and a trier of fact, people have due process. In the adversarial justice system, everyone who is accused is presumed innocent, et cetera, et cetera. In the immigration system, and the particular example that we're seeing all this last 2 weeks, there is an administrative procedure. It is against federal law to cross the border illegally. It's against the law to be here present without being inspected. And the individual from El Salvador, in fact, was arrested under that condition. They were in the country illegally, went to an immigration hearing, had actually 2 hearings, a hearing and then an appeal.
Bullshit. Every soft liberal in this room conciliating that Nazi should be ashamed of himself. This federal government has already revoked the visas of 7 of your classmates, and you're sitting around listening to this fascist tell you about quote-unquote due process, while evicting students who are protesting the genocide, and you soft liberals are doing nothing. You treated him like he's legitimate. Let me ask you a question, you fucking colonizer. Did your ancestors come to this country quote-unquote legally? Answer! Did your ancestors come to this country, quote unquote, legally? I have to ask that fucking fascist to leave.
This is an event run by students. It is being moderated by students. You're being incredibly disrespectful to your fellow students.
Right now, but conciliating
we'd like you to leave now.
Is not going to produce any kind of dialogue or political process. He needs to be called out for what he is.
You have 10 seconds to please finish and depart.
Man who thinks it's a sign of strength and power to deport some of the most vulnerable people in this country.
Sir, if you finish your comment, or would you like to?
I can elaborate further once he answers my question.
I don't think he's going to answer your question.
Get out
So.
of here! What the heck are you doing here?
You get out, bitch.
Oh!
What am I doing here? I'm pointing out that that man is a fucking Nazi, and your classmates are getting their...
You need to leave the event, please, so we can continue.
Nothing. They're getting sent to ICE detention camps in Louisiana run by private prison systems for nothing more than exercising their free speech. And you want to call that man an American? I'm laughing at all of you guys. You guys need to wake up and realize what direction he's taking this place. I'm not shutting down shit, but that fascist man, you weren't talking, he was talking. I'm shutting him up. And we're talking, right? We were talking before, so I call that free speech.
Right now?
I'll be seeing. Yeah, obviously. Let's finish. I don't have no respect for a Nazi like that. Liberals who have respect for a Nazi are just conciliating fascism.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. We have to move on to the next question. And this one has to do a little bit more with demographics and such. So Mr. Chishti, feel free to go first, and then you two could go ahead. But we're seeing a lot of interesting trends recently. So in the last few years, the share of migrants from Central America has actually dropped in favor of those from Asian countries like China and India. And second, under this administration, there has been more deportations going to Central American countries, such as El Salvador. How do you anticipate these changes in demographics to affect both border security and foreign affairs with these nations? Mr. Chishti, you could start off, and then we can go down the line.
Well, obviously there's a huge demographic change in our country and in our communities, just on the unauthorized people and especially the border arrivals. Because I tend to agree that the last 4 years of border arrivals was a big chapter in our history.
Sure.
And it did affect immigration policy and politics in a big way. And let me explain what the fundamental reason for it was. Just the numbers, they were high. But the whole profile of people arriving at the border had drastically changed. In 2014, before 2014, most people arriving at the border, you would say the definition was single Mexican males coming into the border looking for a job. And that started changing in 2014 when more and more Central Americans started coming and more family units started coming. And in the last 4 or 5 years, that went further from Central America. You saw people from all over the world coming and increasingly family units coming. And essentially most of them applying, if not all, applying for asylum. So the whole challenge at the border changed. So that's why we landed up having not only a high volume of arrivals, but a big challenge on our asylum system, which is when that, if you really want to call that, we had a crisis asylum system. But that had to be addressed not by making people ineligible for asylum, because we have people have right to apply for asylum both under national and international law, but to have an efficient working asylum system so that people who actually deserve asylum could get it quickly and people who don't are removed. I mean, I don't think any one of us should have any qualms about it. But we had a broken system which then led to the crisis at the border that we witnessed in the last 4 years.
Yes, I agree, and I think that's one of the things I want to clarify when we talk about the entries in the border. The Refugee Act of 1986 allows folks who want to apply for asylum to go to any port of entry and say, I want asylum. And that is an international law, a humanitarian right, and it's a law within the United States that you are able to apply for asylum regardless of the port of entry that you entered in. So previously, when it was single Mexican adult men, they could be what's called expeditedly removed, meaning they were essentially deported back to their home country right then and there at the border. But when you have families who are then coming to the border and saying, I want asylum, there's a whole different process, and it becomes this sort of snowball that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you don't have an infrastructure at the border to respond to that, to properly vet and to determine what's going to happen, it just continues to snowball. And what we saw here when the buses started to come to Chicago was just a fraction of what the border cities experience, of people crossing through and not having a place to go, not understanding necessarily the systems that they were now living in. And it's really a culture shock, right, for both sides. And so here in the city, we saw that difference when this new folks arrived. We saw tensions not just in the Black, brown community, the white Latino community. We saw it within the Latino community itself. Of now seeing these groups of folks that were here and the city quickly mobilizing to provide them with services because we couldn't have 200, 300, 1,000 people out sleeping, providing them with services, and suddenly folks became very upset. That is an anger that we all have to parse through as a community to discuss why, which we don't have time for today, but certainly I think the shift, and I think when I mentioned at the beginning, we have to talk about this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Why did the shift happen? What were some other things that were happening beyond our own borders that really caused this shift of people coming here to the United States, fleeing and seeking sanctuary in the larger sense of the word, not necessarily in the way that we're using it colloquially now.
I want to pick up on something you said, Ms. Willman. We're talking a lot about undocumented immigrants, but as legal immigrants as well are coming to Chicago, under Mayor Lightfoot and now under Mayor Johnson, what specific policies are being implemented to ensure that people can find work, people are able to get involved with the community? Because we're at a university, and I think many of the members in the audience will sympathize with the fact that we see many people here on the South Side who seem like they're not able to access those resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So the right to work is through the federal government. The city nor the state has the authority to issue a work authorization, which was a shock to many people when we told them, like, hey, these folks are here and they're not going to necessarily be eligible to work right away. It's a process. You have to apply for it. You have to have a right to apply for a work permit. It's a very complicated process, and normally you have to have an attorney. So those are really difficult components. In terms of folks that are undocumented versus those with status, because of the welcoming city, city agents are specifically not allowed to ask about immigration status. So there really aren't any programs that the city created that were specifically for those without status. Obviously, we created a system to support those that were coming to apply for asylum, which was necessary due to, again, this emergency that we had with folks being come and dropped off. But historically, anything that the city does is accessible for everyone, regardless of how long they've been here.
Thank you. And just to pick up on that a little bit as well. So we're talking, we talked a little bit about undocumented immigrants, but rhetoric from both sides of the political spectrum has sort of consistently mentioned support for legal immigration in comparison. So what is sort of being done to improve the pathways to legal immigration in the United States and to sort of fix like the many backlogs that we have? And maybe this is a question that you could address.
I have said often in public that we have two immigration crisis in our country. We actually do have a labor market crisis. Okay. Listen, the baby boomers are retiring at 10,000 a day. They're creating big vacuum in the labor market from high-end occupations to the low-end occupations. There'll be soon, by next 10 years, there'll be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. I'm not a demographer, but demographers will tell you that's a huge milestone. So we really need workers. Except that there are very few legal pathways for people to enter. Really, we have not changed our immigration law, which is based on 1952 architecture, since 1990, the last time we touched it. Just imagine how many times have we changed interest rates since then. We haven't even touched. So therefore, we have a crisis. But I also believe that we have a border crisis. And the two are related. In the sense that people are not, certainly in Congress, have no appetite to fill the problem about our legal migration as long as they can point to a crisis at the border. That's why in some ways, as I say, we have twin problems and they're connected. So you could actually oddly now say, if the Trump administration is successful in controlling the border, which they seem to be, we can now shift to say, let's go to legal immigration. It's the ideal time to say, now is the time to look at the other crisis. And actually, strangely, President Trump has himself said that I believe that people in our farmers don't have enough workers. Our hotels don't have enough workers. He mentioned 2 occupations you can number. He actually even suggested in his own way that maybe we could deport these people and bring them back. So somehow, even in his mind, the need for legal immigration is out there. It's just that we haven't had a political space to pay attention in our country to that. And I think maybe if the borders are controlled, there will be a political space to do that. And we need to reform our selection system across occupations. It's not just high-end occupation, people who are coming to be computer engineers. It's also low-end and middle skill. And right now, if you really look at our selection system, there are almost no opportunities for mid and low skilled workers to come to the United States. That's the problem.
You've highlighted a number of issues with backlogs to legal immigration, et cetera, and policies that you feel need to be changed. Mr. Vitiello, any responses, things that the government is working on at the moment?
At the moment, where I think most of the focus is on solving the crisis problem that existed, and so that's physical border, that's going after the worst of the worst in the interior. I do agree that the crisis that started in 2014 was based on the policy choices that were made at the time. And the solve for the 2014 crisis, when that surge ended, was because some of the policy decisions that the Obama administration made to end the abuse of the asylum system, to have people get an opportunity to claim asylum, but stay in custody until. At the time, in 2014, when that surge started, like every other surge before and since, is because the incentives were misaligned. We were encouraging people to come here because they were being released into the United States in large numbers. Every time that's done, you'll see a surge at the border, regardless of what drives it, because people come for all kinds of different reasons. They get pulled into the country for economic opportunity and for other things. And so that crisis was solved by the Obama administration by offering an opportunity for people to stay in custody while they had their hearings. Once that cycle starts, it lowers traffic at the border. That's how every surge has been ended at the southwest border. Consequences have been imposed for the illegal activity. It brings the activity down. And to the point, once you have restored the credibility in that physical operation, that Americans believe that the border is secure, I think we're going to be much more generous, and I think that includes the president.
And can I add, I think it's really important, your emphasis about the cross industries. I believe, I don't remember, there was like the Gang of Eight who was going to try to do immigration reform maybe a decade ago. Yeah, and they were very focused on STEM, they were focused on like all those really high profile. When you focus on those types of industries, you're leaving women out. And immigration is also a women's issue, so it's really important that we talk about, if there is ever a chance for reform, that we're as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more on like the Chicago side of that as well. Could you just elaborate more on what Chicago's doing, what that sort of looks like, what's going on in Chicago relating to this?
Yes, well, I'm no longer in the city government. Left the day of the transition, want to be really clear about that. I only worked under Mayor Lightfoot. But the city has stayed consistent. I think there has been some, there's been some missing in terms of like building a narrative and making sure that those tensions are lessened between communities. And I think we continue to see that because we see some electeds who are trying to take opportunity to either minimize the Welcoming City ordinance or to get rid of it entirely because they understand and they hear the frustrations from their constituents. But much of this frustration is due to some misinformation or just the frustration they see where the city, again, was supportive of one group and felt they weren't supportive of another. I think the community is still very strongly pushing for being a welcoming city, and I think it's just, again, inherently part of our values that we have seen since the days, again, of Jane Addams and Anton Cermak. And so I think that's going to be something that we continue to see that's in policy is pushed by community. And so I think we saw, again, when there was an attempt to eliminate Welcoming City, the community really came together to advocate for it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I want to move to a slightly different policy area in the way of, again, given that we're in a university, I think this is one of the issues that people in the audience want to hear about. I've heard, people that have signed up for the event definitely want to hear about this. Given that student visas at this university as well have been revoked in recent weeks, I just want to get, thoughts from the panel on what that means for students at universities around the country, number one, and number two, what people can do to sort of practically ensure that they're not, if they are here legally under a student visa, what they can do to make sure that they're safe.
Yeah. And Mr. Chishti, I would love to start with you first.
Well, this particularly about students. Yeah, this has been, an unfortunate recent development.
It's fucking fascism. It's not an unfortunate recent development. They're trying to deport our classmates.
Yeah, so this is, the government is here to respond to what they're doing.
The government is at war with every non-citizen in this U.S. They're not here to respond to shit.
So this is what's happening. There are two provisions of the law which are being used against students. One has been used, it's a provision of the law written in 1952, has been used only once. And it was used against Muhammad Khalil, a recent Columbia graduate. That the Secretary of State can himself or herself say that someone's visa should be revoked, which includes immigrant, he's a lawful permanent resident, because of foreign policy concerns. That's a broad power. That's why it has never been used except for once. And even in that one case, which was against former Deputy Attorney General of Mexico, brought under Clinton administration by then Secretary of State Warren Christopher, the constitutionality of that provision was challenged. And guess which judge said it's unconstitutional? President Trump's sister, a federal judge in New Jersey. That went and appealed to an appeals court. It was never resolved because the INS at that time, not the INS, Department of State, changed its position and decided to bring that person under a criminal charge. That criminal charge was pursued and the man committed suicide in jail. So we never got to know the end of the case law in that case. That's the history of the provision under students like Mr. Khalil, the Turkish student, are being deported. So it's a very important issue, both for how we interpret our law, how due process works. It's important not just because of these two students. It's extremely important for the rule of law. The second is that it seems ICE or DHS only in the last 2 or 3 weeks is expunging records of students in the SEVIS. SEVIS is the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. If a student has to be lawfully here, you have to have a record in SEVIS. And they seem to have expunged lots of people, we think at least about 500 by now, who just one day wake up and they don't have any record. They were not, it seems, offered any opportunity to tell why their record should be. And that's obviously problematic under any administration, that you cannot just change people's status without giving them some opportunity to contest the basis for which you're moving it. So these are deeply troubling issues, and that's why a federal district court in Georgia yesterday ordered the government to reinstate the status of those people, and we're watching that case.
I'd like to sort of reconcile a few of the points that have been brought up. So you talked about, numbers of people whose records are being expunged. You've talked about student visas. We've talked about a number of people, being deported in recent weeks. To Mr. Vitiello, J.D. Vance said in a tweet last Tuesday to the effect of, if the plan of the Democrats does not involve us deporting at least a few million immigrants every year, it's just playing into Biden's narrative of having more illegal immigrants come into the country. This sort of, from an outsider's perspective, and I'm not claiming this is your position, but from an outsider's perspective, it seems that would indicate the administration is looking for quantity over quality. And is that an accurate assessment? And how can we reassure people that due process is being followed in these instances?
Well, there are processes. I mean, everybody on the stage that's talked about this, what the policy is, whether it's the 1952 Act, whether it's the revisions since then, I've been involved in some of them directly. The purpose of immigration law in the United States is to serve the country, whether it's for women in STEM, whether it's for workers in particular industries. And visas are not different. What the vice president said, I think, is in a sense a reaction to what happened in the previous 4 years. By government records alone, just encounters recorded by CBP and what they call known gotaways, that's 11 million people. What I know from operating on the ground in a situation like that is that 11 million people that have been documented to come in illegally. That's on top of people who are never seen by law enforcement. So that could be up to 20 million people in the 4-year period. And so what the vice president is articulating and what people are pushing back against is we're reacting to what happened over the last 4 years. And numbers matter in the sense of you went from nearly 20 million to where we are today.
I'm sorry, so you mentioned 20 million, so you're saying US population's somewhere around 330 million ballpark. So someone in the audience can do the math better than me, but I think that's probably somewhere around 6-7% of the US population you're claiming is here illegally.
That's just in the 4 years. That's on top of what are all the people that were out of status already here.
Great.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Or do you want to respond?
Yes, I mean, we are in the business for numbers.
Yeah.
Our best estimate is that about the current undocumented population in the US is about 13.6 million. We do know that millions of people did come during the 4 years of Biden administration. But it's not 12 million. It's not 20 million that bandied about. We use completely DHS-issued numbers. We think maybe about 5.6 million people were allowed into the country under various programs under the Biden administration, under CBP1 App, under the Cuban, Haitian, Venezuelan, Nicaraguan parole program. Some were given notice to appear. That's roughly 5.6 million people. These are people what we now call in liminal status. They may lose all that status under the Trump administration, and then they will add to the undocumented population. But let's not exaggerate numbers when we don't need to exaggerate.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You mentioned the CBP1 app. Just very briefly, I know that the CBP1 app was sort of suspended earlier in the year. How has that impacted immigration more broadly speaking?
CBP1?
Yes.
CBP1?
The app. Yeah.
I mean, you know what that was. CBP1 was an attempt by the Biden administration that so that people were coming at the border between ports of entry, and the Biden administration decided that to bring control over the border so that people don't show up they could get an appointment sitting in Mexico and arrive at the port of entry to get an appointment. About pretty close to 900,000 people got CBP1 applications. That's a fact. Except I think what happened to the Biden administration, which I do think was a mistake, is that instead of, at the appointment, instead of giving them a credible, fair determination whether they were eligible for asylum, they just let them in under a parole. So that just added to the number of people entering the country who should have been screened for application and created. CBP1 under Trump administration has ended, and they have decided to use CBP1 as a tool for people to register if they're self-deporting from the United States. Because one of the ambitions of this administration is that if things are so uncomfortable for people, either by enforcement measures or by depriving them of the benefits they may otherwise have, that they will self-deport. And 5,000 people have already recorded under CBP1 as having self-deported. So it was a tool built by Biden administration for a different purpose, used by Trump administration for something else.
Great.
I would just add on that, the numbers are what the numbers are. The encounters are available on CBP's website.
Numbers are people.
CBP1, now CBP Home, is an opportunity for people who are here that don't want to go through the drama of being arrested. So they can self-identify in the application, raise their hand, and ask for assistance to get travel documents to travel home, and even financial assistance to buy transportation. And what was going on with CBP1 before, this whole idea of parole, was an abuse of the system. It was encouraging people, as you said, it was encouraging people to get in the pipeline, and it was rewarding them when they showed up at the border for things that they weren't eligible for.
Okay, thank you for your perspective on that. And so we talked a little bit about the numbers, and I want to hone in a little bit more since we are on a university campus. Could you talk a little bit more about how much of those numbers make up students and more of that? And if you could provide any perspective on the Chicago side of it as well, just people coming in, I would love to hear more.
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
So we talked a little bit about the numbers. I just want to hone in on students, and just if you could provide any perspective on that in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, we have colleges here in the city that are obviously suffering, and it's a scary time. I visited another university who's putting on a play that has an immigrant focus, and folks are scared. Immigrant students are scared of even attending because they're worried about being surveyed. So I think it goes without saying that there is an absolute shift in this effort to ramp things up and to be responsive to what the current administration sees as an issue and a problem and a threat, there has sort of been this lopsided effort, to say the least, that is causing real harm. And I think what's important is that all of the things that are being issued in executive order or threatened to be done, there are processes that can be put in place for that to happen. I actually think about birthright citizenship. You can do that if you amend the Constitution, right? So like, what is this gung-ho effort and desire to just bulldoze our processes, the rule of law, the rights that people have to get to an end that are not justified by the means? And I think that's something that we have to continue to talk about. And I think the situation with the students specifically is a real concern because that's not how we want our students to be feeling or facing.
I think the problem with this administration, which will become more and more clear, is its overreach.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say that deporting criminals, reporting terrorists, many people in the country would support. But why in that process overreach to cancel 300 student visas? Or people who have committed no crime. And then it has a consequence on our image in the world. That if we really, for us to become the economic power or the sole dominant national power in the world, we need to have smart people coming to our country, both to come to institutions like this, to work for cutting-edge employers in the country. And when you have an image like this, if you have a choice of going to Australia or going to the US, where would you go? Or going to Europe or going to UK, where would you go? If you have a chance of an employer with Goldman Sachs in England or Goldman Sachs in the US, where would you go? It's the chilling effect it has on people who have nothing to do with criminality, who have nothing to do with unlawful status. And that's sort of where the short-sightedness of this administration comes in, and it doesn't overreach.
Thank you so much for your perspective on that. And we do have to move to Q&A shortly, so I'll just have one final question for everyone to answer. And for Q&A, there will be a floating mic around, and so students can ask questions and other audience members can do that as well. But my final question to everyone on the panel is sort of what do you see the future of immigration to sort of be like in 5 years? This is a very broad question, address it however you'd like. And could you maybe talk about the pathways to legal immigration as well? So why don't we start with Mr. Vitiello and we can just go down the line and then Mr. Chishti.
Well, I think there's an aspiration as it relates to...
Would you want to deport me?
How many babies you ripped up?
330,000 in 1 year, all under your
From 2018 to 2019, he sterilized 40 migrant women at the border. That man is a monster.
We need fucking help.
You're a racist!
Hey, don't put your hands on. Don't not put your hands on. What's disruptive is that man supporting the deportation of our fellow classmates. That's what's disruptive. I'm peaceful. Am I being violent? Deporting people is violent. He's in power for now.
I suppose in response to some of the points that have been raised, Mr. Vitiello, I think we've danced around the point a little bit. We've talked a lot about numbers. We've talked a lot about authority. I think the central question that everybody has is why were these student visas revoked? Like, what is the actual rationale behind it?
I don't know these cases specifically. I'm not involved in the decision making and the vetting and all the things that go through. What I can tell you is that when the government issues a visa, like we've talked about on this stage, the immigration system is supposed to serve the country. And when you accept a visa, when you apply for a visa to come to the United States, there are restrictions on your behavior. So if you want to talk about what the due process is, the informed consent is you accept that visa, you accept that opportunity to come to the United States, but there are limits to what you can do while you're here. And that's the policy that's being pursued as it relates to some of the students, some of the high-profile arrests that you've seen.
Can you speak a little bit to what those limits might be, especially in the context of...
A quick example, if students come to the United States mostly in what they call an F1 visa.
Yep.
It requires you to have a course of study in a college and an accredited university. That's one of the restrictions. If you fall out of class, you get kicked out of campus, or you leave the campus to go work full-time somewhere else, then you're out of status, and that puts you at jeopardy from being removed from the country.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah.
And do you have any final thoughts on that, Ms. Willman or Mr. Chishti?
I think of the future, this is so corny, you have to think about the past, right? I mentioned before, we don't live in a vacuum, and I think it behooves all of us to understand world history and our own engagement as a country, our foreign policy from decades past with other countries, especially the countries that we see an influx of people coming to the United States. The United States has had a very robust interaction in foreign government and foreign policy in the Northern Triangle, other countries who've also been destabilized. And so we see folks then coming here seeking help. And so I think it's important that we're educated citizens, that we're educated residents. Here's a very educated school, that you understand that history, understand sort of what led one person from go to A to B, because it's certainly not just this idea that if I walk thousands and thousands of miles, they're gonna let me in. Certainly there is some perhaps misinformation and some narrative building, but it's this whole American dream. We've built that narrative ourselves, right? This idea of being a land of
killing
promise.
indigenous population.
Sure, okay, I'm talking, please don't interrupt me. And so I think it's really important that we understand both their history and how we've engaged with foreign policy, and then also understand that how immigration works. It's a very complicated system. A lot of it is based on discretionary decisions, just like when visas may get revoked. And so it's important that we understand that, because if we don't like it, then you can advocate to make those changes. I know right now we're facing a very extreme time, and it's beyond just calling your elected official, but it's important that we understand those nuances so that we can advocate for the appropriate things.
It's about the future. Listen, President Trump is a duly elected president, but he's also a lame duck. And facts are not lame duck. Facts will survive President Trump. And the facts are, as a country, we were born on immigrant tradition, and immigration is our future. And our industries, whether it's from high-end, as I mentioned, or people taking care of elderly people in nursing homes, people taking care of patients in hospitals, people taking care of in hotels or in restaurants, people harvesting our food, people processing our food, people cooking our food, people serving our food. Just remember during COVID, they were almost all immigrants. That is not going to change. So we have to depend on an open immigration policy if we want to remain an economic force. And that's, I think, finally what will force Congress to get to the business of changing our legal immigration system so that people who we need in our country for various occupations can get here lawfully and integrate in a successful way in cities like Chicago.
You use your immigrants, that's all you want to do. That's all you see them as is labor. Have some fucking respect.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. We've covered a lot, and there's a lot more that we didn't cover. So I want to pitch it to the audience now. I think we're going to do a floating mic, so if you have questions, you can just raise your hand, and we'll take as many questions as we can. Please try to keep them concise so we can get to as many as possible.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Christopher. I'm a fourth year in the college. I truly appreciate and respect each of you for coming here and speaking your minds and saying what you believe to be true and disagreeing with one another and agreeing at certain points. I am truly grateful for all of your presence here this afternoon. I'd like to ask for each of you, what do you think is the most important thing that the administration is doing right now in service of the country and in service of the future? And then what do you think is the area in which the administration needs to improve most upon?
I can start. I spent the entirety of my adult life on the problem as it relates to border security. And so there is no dispute about the success that we're having at the physical border. What needs to, and that's based on policy, that's based on physical operations, that's based on all the things that make a successful border, like the physical border. It also, improvements in trade and tourism and those kinds of things that CBP is also responsible for. What needs to be done better is an articulation of how we're going to sustain where we are. So in the physical operations at the border, things are going well, but it won't stay that way if we don't continue the policies as they are, if they're not backstopped by Congress, and then resources are going to, resources are already a problem. We are still in a continuing resolution, so we're essentially on the budget that Joe Biden built while he was the president. And so in order to sustain the gains that have been made and solidify the policy, Congress will have to act.
If I could briefly follow up on that. So you mentioned earlier, much earlier in fact, that you have sort of this dichotomy between cutting down illegal immigration and then supporting legal immigration, and the former comes before the latter. Is there sort of a point at which you would be able to transition between those two? Because you're talking about solidifying these policies. I'm wondering, is there an end goal there?
If we return to a place where the American people who are advocates of the president that voted for Donald Trump and the policies that we're talking about today, if we can assure Americans that the border's not going to be wide open again for anybody to walk across by the thousands and abuse every system and overwhelm every system that exists down there, Americans are generous. Many of us, all of us here, have an immigrant story in our background. And if we get to a point where the physical border allows people to do that border is controlled and people can visit and claim asylum at the ports of entry, they can be tourists, they can come in and we could have visas issued for students and all the other kinds of occupations that we want in the United States, then I think the American people and the president himself would be generous about how we change the legal immigration system to serve the needs of the American people. That's what immigration law is supposed to do.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Williams?
I was going to say, I think in their effort to get from A to B, things have been very imprecise, and it has led to some sloppiness and to, again, the violation of rights. And I think Americans really value our individual liberties. And so when you have citizens receiving a notice saying, hey, your parole is getting revoked, you got to leave this country, when they've never had parole because they were born in this country, it really causes a chilling effect and a pause. And I think that's leading to questioning, and it's leading to people saying, hey, this isn't right. So frankly, the imprecision and the sloppiness is the best gift they could have given us, to be able to have people who maybe normally would not have been paying attention wake up a little bit more.
So you asked me what do we give credit for and what's the most. So I mean, you have to give credit to this administration for creating a sense of control at the border, because I think that has affected the narrative about how people perceive our challenge in immigration. I think what the administration has done the worst at is taking rough shots with our Constitution. We obviously, people enter with accepting the laws under which they were entered as students, but we also have something called the Constitution. And people have to abide by that. The case that is of all the cases that have come out in the last, whatever it is, 1 month, the case that has broken out and caught everyone's imagination is actually about a formerly unauthorized person who was deported to El Salvador against an old immigration judge's order. He's not a citizen, but it has captured the attention of the people in a simple judgment issued by a Reagan-appointed judge in the Fourth Circuit, who said very few things get to the heart of a matter. These exact words: this gets to the heart of a matter. That the government cannot whisk away people from the streets and send them to another country and then say we can do nothing to bring them back. Because if that happens to an unauthorized person today, that could happen to a citizen tomorrow. And the courts will say we can't do anything. That's where the heart of the actions of this administration have caught the attention of the people.
Thank you for your
The
response.
individual in I'll just add, the individual in question, as you said, was here illegally and is a native son of El Salvador.
I understand that.
He was deported. He was ordered deported by a judge in this country. He appealed that order and lost again.
I understand that. No, he was ordered withholding of removal. His application for asylum was denied. His application for withholding was granted by a judge. You cannot deport someone against someone who has a withholding of removal to that country. You could remove him to some other country. You cannot remove him to El Salvador.
But that's not what the court said.
The administration has said that his deportation to El Salvador was an administrative error, correct?
Representation to the court.
Hi. Thank you all so much. One thing we're just going to continue with student questions. Thank you all so much for being here. I work with Doan in the International Policy Program. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants that came here under the H-1B program that have now naturalized. And one thing that has really alarmed me about the Trump administration is its response to H-1B visa holders, and its, I would say, honestly deplorable treatment and attitude towards H-1B visa holders. So when we're talking about bringing people here that care about helping this country and care about the values of this country, it's really disappointing to see people treat them with honestly a disgusting attitude. So what I want to ask is, what is the Trump administration's next steps when it comes to bringing people here that want to help America, that want to help American values, but also helping people like my parents make a living in this country and make a difference in this country? What is the Trump administration's next steps there?
Well, I don't know your specific example for the H-1B, but the goal here is to bring a semblance of control back to the system, the physical operation at the border, and regulate immigration that gives confidence back to the American people. And so if the immigration laws are supposed to serve Americans, then those goals are aligned with what you're talking about. If the H-1B is on the books, we bring people in every year, Congress sets the limit for how many people come in, and they do all kinds of things for us across the society. That program's not going to end, and I've not seen any hostility toward it in the policy discussions that I've been in.
All right. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, so go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I guess my question is sort of regarding the uncertainty in the immigration process right now, and in particular, I guess, for student visas, you could say, but also visas in general, where you don't really have a confidence that these visas won't be stripped from you. And like you mentioned earlier, right, like in most courts, there's a sort of due process system, but in immigration courts, there's often not that level of, scrutiny and that level of, rights that appellants have. So my question, I guess, for all of you is, how can the US going forward rectify this? Because I have friends who are internationals here who are just quite afraid to go back home because they don't know when they come back to the States if they will have their visas potentially rejected on these procedural grounds. There's crazy cases, and I think a case of somebody in Utah, for example, who on a minor charge unrelated to anything political, where a PhD student was stripped of his visa. So going forward, how can future administrations, maybe this administration wishes to fix such an issue and create a streamlined immigration system where you're confident that if you follow XYZ rules that you won't be deported just randomly based on whims? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're speaking to the larger structural discussion that we're having up here. The process by which visas are issued and approved and people are admitted under the terms of those visas, those exist. Those rules are written down. Now, there have been changes, but as long as people follow the rules as they are, then it's going to be just fine. Now, the process that gets to where we are, the administrative procedures, the immigration hearings, asylum hearings, et cetera, that's in control of the executive branch. And if Congress or the American people, the people in this room, that they want to change that, then that's something that Congress has to do. But right now, that system exists in the form that it exists, and it is in control of the executive branch. And so the changes that we are seeing are based on a reaction to what's happened over the last many years, the last 4 years specifically. The border was totally out of control. People were given parole that had absolutely no reason to have it. And it was given in circumstances that the law doesn't allow for. Mm-hmm. What we're seeing now is the pendulum swinging back.
Okay. We have time for 1 more question, maybe 2 if it's very fast.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Obviously, a very difficult conversation, and I want to just say thank you for doing each of your respective jobs, whatever it is. I want to kind of touch on the Congress. There was a bipartisan bill that was coming through in the May of last year that got derailed for political reasons. My question is, like, when are we going to stop playing politics with human lives, approach this problem as a humanitarian challenge, like stop sending military to do whatever with people who literally have nothing? Like, how can we find more humanity in like each of us in this effort?
I don't disagree with you that something that lots of this needs to change, but I also would say that there isn't a single entity on the planet that does more for people who are in distress at the border than the organization that I used to be with. So when you talk about the compassion that those individual agents have for people when they see people sometimes on their worst day in the worst kinds of conditions, I want people to recognize that it's the people that we ask to take an oath to protect us are the ones on the front line that are helping those people and do more for them than anybody has in the journey up until that point. What you're asking for is for Congress to get behind a set of policies that both protect the country and make the immigration system work for the rest of us. That's not in control of Donald Trump. The bill that you spoke of, that he was supposedly killed before he was even the president, was a disaster on a number of levels. But what has to happen is something like that, or something better than that, has to be put in front of Congress. They have to rally behind a set of principles and a set of ideals that protect us. That could happen. I don't see it happening in the short term.
Ms. Willman and Mr. Chishti, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I want to add, I think when we talk about the border and the need for there to be some type of process, I think most folks are in agreement to that. I want to, I think, give the caveat that there is some fear that like the border will never feel secure enough for anybody, and that will be like the stop that doesn't allow us to then move on to the next space. So I think it's important to understand, even though we are far away from it, what's happening at the border, how it's impacting the cities there. And then I think you've mentioned a few times that our immigration laws need to be in service of Americans, and that's how our system is set up. Like if you're a citizen and you apply for your spouse, for your sibling, you're the beneficiary as the American citizen. And so that's accurate, but it doesn't have to be cruel, right? It can be a more humanitarian approach, and I think that is absolutely what's missing. So we really need to think about how do we do this, and we also agreed when the buses were coming here that there needed to be a system at the border so that folks could have a process in a way they didn't have to be on a bus for 24 plus hours with no food or water, which was done by a Texan government, it wasn't done by the federal government. And so there is so much work to be done, but I think we have to all agree that we have to do this under the rule of law, and that we want to approach this in a humanitarian way, understanding our duties, both as residents and citizens of this country and as global citizens of this world.
Mr. Chishti, thoughts on forging a path to compassion while also maintaining
Yeah,
law?
I mean, I do think that we have to get behind a legal immigration reform as quickly as politics will allow. And I think it has to be done in a bipartisan way. Pushing it in a partisan way hasn't worked, really. I mean, I have some faith that some small measures may be possible even under this administration. I just watch what President says himself more than I read the statements and the executive actions. He himself said that we could do something for the DACA kids, that he thinks the DACA kids are contributing to the society. He actually used the word that they have started businesses. He actually said this, I know some of them have started big businesses. He said something about agriculture workers, and he said something about hotel workers. So I think to me, they look like that there are possibilities of taking small bites at this. I call them down payments. If we get used and build the muscle for doing small things like that, and they're successful, we may then be able to convince Congress that we can do the big thing, which is to have a comprehensive immigration reform.
Great. I just want to add to that. You're absolutely right. I watched the president when they lost the midterms, right when Nancy Pelosi was retaking the speakership, in the Oval Office with all four corners, so the Senate and the House, both Republicans and Democrats. And he told everyone in that room that if they gave him what he wanted on the border, and that's a lot of things, I'll admit, but if in the case then, it was all about helping him establish the border wall in his vision of it at the time. He told the four corners, he told the Republicans and the Democrats, House and Senate, that he would give them a better deal than anything they could get working amongst themselves. So you're right in the sense that if winning looks like securing the border in a way that's meaningful, that the American people can get behind and trust, then he would be the right president to give a generous deal for a legal immigration reform that many of us would be satisfied with.
All right, time for one last question.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My question is, first and foremost, I'm an alumni. I'm also serving the United States Marine Corps. I worked in the Department of State issuing visas, and now I'm an immigration attorney for a big firm. My question is on registry. So is the registry program that was enacted in this month an enforcement tool to deport more immigrants? That's my question.
Well, it's, yeah, I'm a lawyer. I guess it's a very difficult question. I mean, as you know, the new registration requirement, which went into effect on April 11th, is that right?
Yes.
Is directed at people whose biometric information the government doesn't have. So it affects it doesn't affect lawful permanent residents, it doesn't affect people who have gotten work authorization and had their biometric information taken. So the idea is the government wants information on people on whom he doesn't, which includes the controversial stuff is about the unauthorized. So the difficult question for all lawyers, including you, is that what do you tell, what advice do you give an unauthorized person that should they go and register or no? Highly delicate issue. It's not, I don't know what I would do. All I can tell you is the following, is that it is the requirement now of the law that they must register. And if they don't register, then they get one more ground for deportation in the future with a criminal penalty. So if someone in the future had other means of adjusting, like they got married to a US citizen, they may have one more disability now by not registering. That's on the other hand, if they register, their address is now with DHS and they know where they are. That's the Solomonic choice that lawyers have to face. I sympathize with you, but I think you have to really discuss this with each individual client, telling the both sides of the equation.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I just want to take a moment to thank the audience and to thank the panelists, Mr. Vitiello, Ms. Willman, and Mr. Chishti for taking the time to come here and to speak to our students and to our broader audience members. And yes, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and we really appreciate the time.